Okay.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to day 23. Happy Friday. You made it through another week. Good morning, Penny.
Good morning, Kelly. Good morning, Mike. Good to
And
see
it's
you.
my pleasure to introduce today's guest. Today's guest is Michael Matsuda, who is the superintendent of the Anaheim Union High School District. Another way of saying that is he's my old boss. And so it's a pleasure. Mike and I have come up through the ranks. Of course, he went a little farther than I did because he's smarter than I am. But
I noticed that.
we asked Mike to come on because there's a lot of really progressive things going on in the district. And Mike received a lot of attention lately. I've seen him in a lot of articles. I know that he's been in some national publications as superintendents to watch. And though I know Mike personally, I just think professionally, he's really the right person at the right time. So Mike, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Kelly, and good to see you again, Penny.
Good to see you, and thank you on, at a time when a superintendent's job has got to be incomprehensibly hard. You are giving us a little bit of your time today, so I thank you so much for joining us. When I was there, and I don't know how many years ago it was, for part of your writing initiative, I was so struck by the idea that you took on something really big across years. And I'm just curious, how do you sustain the momentum for an initiative like that? How do you monitor it? How do you integrate it into classrooms? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I've been asked similar questions, how do we change the system? And it begins with the teachers, right? Because if the teachers own it, then, and if we have the courage to allow them to create and innovate, guess what? Amazing things are going to happen. And because of lead teachers like Kelly and, so many across this country, people that tune into this show, for example, that are really committed to literacy and learning and reflection and growth. If we unleash that, and there's something like 3 million teachers across America, imagine what can happen with the 60 million young people. That's the crossroads we're at, and that's really we need the courage to allow that to happen.
Mike, you talked a little bit in some of the publications that you've written recently that the pandemic actually presents an opportunity for transformation. And even for the pandemic, I know in doing a lot of work with you that you recognize that a lot of things that were going on in school were really not the kinds of things that would adequately prepare kids once they leave K-12. And I know in a recent article, you talked about the acronym VUCA. Could you share a little thinking about that?
VUCA is a military term that was coined in the 1990s in response to the fall of the USSR. The American military felt we were headed into a VUCA world: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And a lot of business folks are using that acronym VUCA for the world that we're in and that we're entering. And I believe we need to educate. When we talk about we, educational leaders, need to prepare ourselves for this VUCA world. So many educators, superintendents, I'm kind of disappointed with, because you tend to, when there's uncertainty, you tend to default to what you know, right? And what we know is the status quo, is the world of testing and accountability and all of that. And I think that those days are over.
Yes.
They're over. And so what's the transformation towards?
Well, prior to the pandemic, as I think many of our young people already knew in their families, was a world of this concept called the sort of the gig economy, in which everything was a short-term gig without benefits. It was a going from job to job, and where coming out of the university system with very high debt and work, everybody knows someone that's coming out of college and working as a waiter or something like that. So there are definite cracks in the system prior to the pandemic. And I think we need to look at jobs and careers rooted in authentic voice and purpose. And I think there's just a huge opportunity here to transform education. I say it's like, I ask the kids often, like, does education work for you or do you work for education? And so many of them feel that it's more like a factory, that, the testing is about artificial sorting of them. I mean, they're smart kids. They figure it out by the time they're seniors. And we have got to change the system so it does work for them, but in a way that does not compromise the critical thinking, the literacy, the ability to speak and write, and in ways that are going to help them move to wherever they need to go.
Amen. I so agree.
So I know, having been in the district, that even long before the pandemic, I think one of the most impressive things that's happened under your leadership is this idea that all content areas in the district, regardless of content areas, are focused on something called the 5 C's. Could you share some thinking about the 5 C's with us?
Well, 4 of those C's were coined by a national nonprofit, which was developed after the initial Bush administration, focused on testing. And they were comprised of some very forward-thinking corporate folks, as well as higher ed, and even the NEA was part of it. And it was called P21, 21st Century Skills. And those 4 C's were creativity, collaboration, communication, critical thinking. And our district has added the 5th C, which is compassion, right? Especially self-compassion. But you think about those 5 C's taken together, it's really about developing emotional intelligence. And much of emotional intelligence is rooted in the ability to self-reflect. And I know that's what you and Penny have talked about all along in terms of literacy, the ability to become a critical self-reflector and critical friend to somebody else in terms of how you're supporting their writing or speaking. That is a huge skill that our business partners are saying is lacking in American education right now.
It's such an important focus, but I have to tell you, that was that was on the chart, with all the goals for my district. And yet there were these continual battles within my school over what did those things mean, right? Where students are always in rows and I'm like, that's not collaboration, right? Collaboration to learn something doesn't look like the teacher giving you the information.
Right. So we had the teachers help define that. We created a rubric around that, even though P21 gave us sort of the breadcrumbs, but the teachers themselves developed, and it's a living document, our rubric, right? So we are to the point where we have a critical mass of teachers who are integrating the 5 C's into a grade. And guess what? Our partners at UC Irvine, Cal State Fullerton are looking, now we've been doing this long enough where we have longitudinal data, where there's a term in higher ed called persistence and success rates, right? Especially looking at from freshman to sophomore persistence. UC Irvine, which is a major UC in California, their persistence rates from freshman to sophomore is 91%.
Wow.
The Anaheim Union, which is going to be high, right? Because it's a UC, they take the top 10%. But the Anaheim Union High School District cohort is 93.5%. We are outperforming sort of the so-called, the rich kids from the south of the county, and UC Irvine is crediting that to the 5 C's, our development of grit and persistence and authentic student voice.
I would say, when I left Magnolia, when the pandemic hit, that last year, we were right on the cusp, right, as school-wide portfolio, school-wide. Right. So an art teacher, here's evidence in my class of collaboration, critical thinking, communication, creativity, compassion. Right. If you're a PE teacher, here's evidence of those 5 C's. And and I know a lot of this was built on some of the work initially done by Mike Switzer, a teacher at Savannah High School. But when the entire faculty kind of shifted through that lens, it really did make them kind of reconsider their practice.
Yeah, there were some very interesting things that were going on, Kelly, as you know, with these teachers who are not normally, I mean, obviously they're not English teachers, to get the math teachers or band teachers or dance teachers think about these 5 C's, and definitely in athletics that's already been happening, the 5 C's, teamwork and this sort of grit, but having them press the pause button and deliberately reflect and get students to reflect about their growth, right? And I think that's a really powerful skill to have. That's a life skill, difficult to teach and difficult to measure sometimes. Mm-hmm. But there's something going on in our district when you look at the longitudinal data.
One thing I noticed when I was there, so you had Kelly as a lab site, right? And when you say that you have these teachers who are, they're spinning all those plates in the air at the same time and they're doing it well, it seems like such a smart move to then have lab sites where teachers come and visit and see it in action. And I know when I would talk to Kelly about them, he would talk to them before the lesson, they would watch the lesson, and then they'd gather after. What did you notice? What do you see? What can you take back? And that model is so powerful. And you're not a district that has an enormous amount of money. You don't have more funds than other places. You just made it a priority, right?
Yeah, and that's a concern, Penny, right now, because districts do have a chunk of money through the Biden stimulus across America, right? And are they going to go back to the status quo and go back to double down on test scores, right? Or are they going to truly take advantage of this and help transform through the teacher leaders, right? There's Kelly Gallagher's, at every single district, right? There's strong teachers across America, and we need to tap into that talent right now.
I love that. I also love, one last question for me anyway, the compassion piece, which was not our district studied the 4 C's. They didn't add that piece. But what could be a more important time than right now when we have so much violence, the Asian hate, the Black violence? It is hard to walk away and not be facing, but everywhere I go, people will say, well, don't give me political titles. Don't tell me about book clubs that are going to push that. I mean, how do you help teachers negotiate what's called courageous conversations by Singleton?
So we are a leader in California in civic education, civic engagement, right? I mean, arguably democracy is under threat across America. And when I hear educators, talk about that, I say, well, it's kind of our fault, right? Because we've been focused on these test scores and not really modeling what democracy should be all about. And it's really bringing in what some people might consider are, political issues, but these are issues that are important to kids and to their futures, from climate change to race relations to mental health, right? Access to healthcare. All these things can be taught in a way that's nonpartisan, you're not imposing, you're allowing the kids to develop their own sort of curriculum, kind of based on the broad curriculum, but going deep with it, learning fact from fiction. And we have a lot of TED Talks in our English, across the curriculum, but kids are doing TED Talks. And if you think about that, that's a construct that affirms a kid's identity, the narrative structure, which you guys know, the narrative by high school has been kind of shunted aside, right, for the argumentative, right, in an AP synthesis, so you can pass the AP synthesis test, right? So I think that we've forgotten about the kid and the kid's voice, right, and the kid's identity. And affirming that identity, you're going to need to have implicit bias training and cultural relevant pedagogy. You're going to need to develop safe places where kids can learn to talk about race and gender and all the differences out there, religious differences, because where else are they going to talk about it? And respect each other's differences. That's really key, right? And so in civic engagement, they research a particular topic, they debate it, and then they, just like in a TED talk, they try to persuade someone else. This is my issue, and this is why I think you should join me. And we've added another piece, which is the career piece. Well, the kid might say, hey, this is what I want to do. This is how I'm going to make education work for me, right? This is my issue. And we're teaching them how to connect the dots. We're teaching them who to hold responsible for what, right? Because that's these folks that are trying to manipulate people are trying to confuse them, right? And misplace the responsibility and scapegoat and finger point and all of that. So we're allowing safe places for that to happen. And on top of that, we're bringing in the practice of mindfulness into our district. And we started with ourselves, the cabinet. We do principal meetings. We start with 3 to 5 minutes of meditation and self-reflection, right? All this stuff. And now we've brought it into the classroom. And we have and I don't believe in imposing things. I believe in inviting the teachers. We've had hundreds of teachers who are trained up, and now it's in the classrooms. In fact, the parents are demanding it too. We're doing it in 3 or 4 languages as well. So, this approach to solving this race problem is really about that 5th C. Compassion begins with self-compassion. And as you folks know, so much of the hatred and scapegoating is based on self-hate, right? And not accepting themselves. It's easier to blame someone outside of you for your problems rather than look inward, right? It's much easier. In history, it's been that way. It's been that way with my parents who were interned in the Japanese American internment. So I'm very sensitive to this, but I'm also, really, I think it's rooted in a lack of self-love. That's what it is.
Mike, that's great. It's really rich. This ability though, it feels like we're in a pivot time, right? This
Yes.
ability to transform education.
Yes.
I mean, don't you think the university model as we know it is in trouble?
Yes, just ask Google, right? Google's creating a whole series of courses that are going to undermine the traditional universities, right? Because you can take in 3 months, you can get a certificate in cybersecurity or whatever and get a job, right? And they've got like hundreds of corporations signed up to that. You don't need a bachelor's degree anymore. The world's changing too fast, and I don't think higher ed has pivoted. They're not prepared for VUCA higher ed, right? It's very slow. You got to deal with all of that. I mean, you go to colleges now, and I went to a great university, UCLA, and I'm mentoring young people who are at UCLA, and they say, Mr. Matsuda, I'm a senior now, and my friends are just going to go to graduate school, but no one knows what they want to do. And I said, that hasn't changed in 40 years. That's the way it was when I went. But back in the day, I didn't come out $100,000 in debt. And back in the day, I can get a job pretty easily with a bachelor's degree. And these kids know it. So that's a great question. And I think that we're going to see some falling out here. But I think the caveat is, let's not just jump on the hard skills and getting all these quick fixes, right? Because there is something to say for this for kind of a university education, right? In terms of who you're exposed to in the environment of thinking, right? And this whole, love of lifetime learning. That's really what, and I think we're trying to instill that early with young people. And it could be the university or maybe not.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you about that because, that's where I work now, 2 days a week, and teaching writing to freshmen. And one of the things that happened with COVID is that the university was spending so much money on weekly tests for wristbands to make sure everybody's safe on campus.
Right.
Over this last year and a half, they've come out with this slew of programs they're eliminating. And I think about one of them, teacher training, which, there's other places in the state where you can get that. But don't you see, I'm wondering, how is teacher training going to match what we need? Because it doesn't seem to right now. I do a lot of
Right.
conversations online with classes, but what do you see as, what do teachers need coming out of college to be ready for VUCA?
Well, they need to teach the 5 Cs because the content is in your phone, right? And you really know, I mean, that's the difference between information, right, and wisdom, right? So that's the skill that they need regardless of content. And I mean, but in California, you think about like the higher secondary teacher credentialing, right? The big areas of jobs are in cybersecurity or artificial intelligence, or there's no credential in that, right? Or you think about these big challenges. How do you climate change? Climate change is cross content, right? And there's not a credential in that. So we need to get out of the box. We need to learn how to integrate across the curriculum. And from Kelly's old school in Magnolia, they're leading the region in cybersecurity. And you have English teachers now looking at teaching Romeo and Juliet through the lens of protecting your personal information, right? Imagine if there were focus on that, there would be no Romeo and Juliet. So the teachers are, and unfortunately, this is more the younger teachers that are open to a lot of this stuff. And I think everybody needs to start changing and thinking and rethinking. The other thing too, in public schools, we're spoiled, right? We're coming, we're lifelong, in the same job. But that 99% of our kids, they're not going to be in that situation. They're going to have to be nimble. They're going to have to deal with this VUCA world, right? So, at the same time, I think, Penny, it's very exciting to be an educator because things are changing so much. And there's a lot of energy. You come to our district, there's a lot of energy because we're about preparing kids to solve these problems that my boomer generation has left for them. But we're also preparing them to, hey, you can monetize this too. It's about, really solving the problems and finding your own career. The other thing I want to say to our audience too, that's not just double down on STEM. The humanities are vital, right? I just came out of a workshop, or I was a speaker this morning on artificial intelligence, and I said, hey, we need ethicists. I mean, you think about all these kids that are going into artificial intelligence and programming, mostly white male, right? These guys are playing God with all of us. And we need to ensure that there's an ethical lens as well as getting gender and, folks of color in there too. But definitely the ethics and where do you learn that? You learn that in the humanities.
I love that you said that.
Yeah, I love that as well. I love that. I'm just mindful of our time, but maybe one more quick question, Mike. That's this idea of, okay, we need to be nimble to,
right,
prepare kids differently. Maybe you could just share very quickly how the Anaheim Union High District is positioning students in various ways to be successful after they leave the district.
So teachers are now working on thematic units that are like global warming or, the race relations, these things that we know, because we've done years of TED Talks, we know what the common topics are that are going to hook kids in. So they're creating these units that can be used for credit recovery, right? Because everybody's, wants to figure out like how do you do credit recovery. And they can be used for civic engagement. In California, Penny, there's a seal of civic engagement once you graduate. So and that gets kids moving, and doing stuff and connecting the dots. So we're trying to create these integrated units, teacher created, that are going to be vetted by teachers and then put into an open source library for all teachers, even outside the district, to have access to. And again, I think if we capture the intellectual capital of our teachers, we're going to be in good shape.
But you've also set up situations for with partnerships with the university levels, right?
We have, and we have a ton of dual credit going on with the community colleges, and so that they can fast track into the universities, right? They can go straight into the universities, but they can go to community colleges and transfer it over. And I think all of that takes relationship building. And, you have to be vulnerable. You have to build trust. You have to move people's cheese, both internally and externally. Not easy to do. It took some years. But like I said, we have longitudinal data that's showing a lot of success.
I know from where I taught that a lot of students were gained automatic admission into universities on some of the things that we taught them to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, but
That's
real
a
quickly.
generational
Yeah.
changing. That's a generational changing thing.
Well, real quickly, so you have a lot of Latinos in our district, right? And generation ago, they came from certain areas of Mexico, and then they said, hey, you got to come here, come to Anaheim and get a job as a gardener, as a custodian, right? And that would create that word of mouth. Now we have kids graduating from your school, Magnolia High School, graduating just a high school diploma, 2 dual credit in cybersecurity, getting a job at Hulu at $65,000 a year, right? And now they can take the pledge, the transfer option, right? Go to UCI and get $100,000 a year. And now they're telling their friends who are first generation Latinos, just like them, hey, this is the way to do it. Cybersecurity, right? And so we're shifting that pathway where a generation ago it was to get a good job, you'd have to be a gardener or a custodian in our district. We have a lot of, people related, right? From the same rancho in Mexico. Now those second generation are going straight into cybersecurity jobs. So that's the shift that needs to happen in this country. But it's very important that we get those stories out and the kids have the courage to share the stories, right? And I think that's going to help us move quicker through this expected recession. That's upon us now.
I hear you have a great belief in kids, but I think you also have a great love for their success.
Yeah.
I hear that in you. That's like an essential ingredient. It's really inspiring to listen to you.
And with the Biden money coming down the pike, it's essential that school administrators think about using that money in a way that's going to move kids forward, not a way that continues what is already being done. Mike, we want to thank you for coming today. We often end though by asking each guest, what are you reading?
Okay, I'm ready because I've watched the show before. Well, I'm rereading Joan Didion, right?
Oh.
Slouching Toward Bethlehem, because I think that Joan, in the late 60s and 70s, she knew as a reporter, there were tectonic cultural changes going on, right? And she captured it. And I think we're in the same area. This VUCA thing is the same thing. So, Slouching Toward Bethlehem is based on a Yeats poem, right? And the first lines are, turning and turning in the widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold, right? And it's just a wonderful poem that captured that tectonic cultural shift, the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement, women's movement, right? All that happening in the 60s and 70s. And I think this world that we're entering now is similar. And I believe that our young people are positioned to capture this through their reflective writing and speaking, through their music, through their art. And I think we're poised for some really great things coming out of this generation. I feel very optimistic about them.
And what a way to end the week on a Friday. Those comments. So, I worked in as you did, Mike, in that district for many, many years, and I had many different superintendents. I can't tell you how fortunate I feel that I ended my run in the Anaheim Union District under your leadership and the thing you're doing. I'm proud to be associated with that district still to this day.
Well, thanks, Kelly. And it's not over with you.
I know. I'm going to come back and do some work for you next year. But anyways, wasn't he great, Penny?
Oh my gosh. I'm going to actually beg you to let me bring my friend. We're working on a book on leadership and come spend a couple days following you, because everything you say is what we're writing about, but seeing it in action, I would just love that.
Penny. Let's do it.
I will.
Thanks, Mike. Okay. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Have a great weekend, and we'll see you all on Monday.